Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again. Today we're back with another magic video. Today marks the official release of Lorwyn Eclipsed, so I wanted to give you a breakdown on all the cards that I think are powerful potential pickups from the set. So whether you're looking for cards to splash in your old decks, or just trying to find some upgrades to the newly released Commander precons, this video should cover all your bases. And if you like the magic content I've been doing, make sure to like and subscribe. It does a ton to help out the channel and keeps the videos coming. And I'd be curious to know in the comments what cards you're most excited to pick up from the set. First up, I wanted to cover the cards I'm most interested in picking up from the main set. Sapling Nursery is an 8 mana enchantment with affinity for forests. It has landfall, giving you a 3/4 green tree folk with reach whenever a land enters under your control, and you can pay 1 and a green to exile it to make your tree folk and forests indestructible until end of turn. This is a pretty neat card for landfall focused decks. 8 mana is obviously quite expensive, but with the affinity for forests, you can get it down for significantly cheaper if you have a forest heavy mana base or you're just playing mono green. Landfall decks have a lot of ways of making tokens, but a few more never hurt, especially one that has an option to protect those tokens from a board wipe. Dream Harvest is easily the coolest sorcery of the set, and it's a great addition for thief-based decks, giving me a lot of potential value out of casting opponent's spells. While its cost is high at 7 mana, it can end up casting significantly more than 7 mana's worth of spells. Typically, effects like this just have your opponent reveal until they hit a non-land, making them a lot weaker if your opponents are running cheap spells. But with Dream Harvest, you're guaranteed to get at least a total mana value of 5 or greater. Or you could hit multiple cheap spells and then hit a really big one, getting you over that 5 mana threshold. At worst, you're getting essentially 15 mana worth of spells for 7, so pretty much half the rate there. Like most Thief cards, you have to keep in mind the quality of your opponent's decks, as well as if they're based on a very synergistic theme that might get you less individual value out of the cards. But in general, as far as generic Thief spells go, I think Dream Harvest is going to be a really powerful option on the higher end of the curve. The other sorcery that earned a featured spot here is Winnowing, which provides a new take on a creature type based board wipe, allowing you to punish opponents for not having creatures which all share a creature type, while rewarding you for doing so yourself. 6 mana ain't cheap as far as board wipes go, but the convoke cost can make it significantly easier to cast, so you're never actually paying 6 for it. The only downside of this card is it is going to be significantly weaker against other decks that are also all in on one specific creature type. So how good this card will be will depend a lot on how many of those types of decks are in your group. But against non-kindred focused decks, this can be a very powerful board wipe for very little cost. The first legendary we're looking at from the set is Irdu, Carrier of Dawn, who also flips into Isilu, Carrier of Twilight. Irdu is not only a really strong new commander for Orzhov Sacrifice decks, but he also fits great in the 99 for those kinds of decks too. 5 mana for a 5/5 with flying and lifelink is a solid body, and since he gives your other creatures Convoke, you can use the rest of your board to play out even more cards right after he enters. The real reason to play him though is so you can flip him on the next turn into Isilu, Carrier of Twilight, to give all your other non-token creatures persist, which enables some serious sacrifice shenanigans. You can assemble a Drainer, a Sack Outlet, and a creature that gives itself a counter on entering. Isilu will enable you to drain all your opponents to death. But you don't necessarily have to go with a combo focus with this card, even though it lends itself to that naturally, and can just have the persist be there for a bit of value, or as a deterrent to a board wipe. Morningtide's Light is an interesting mix of a blink and protection spell for 4 mana. While being sorcery speed is going to make it less versatile, it still has some flexibility of being able to blink opponent's creatures as well as your own, so if you want, you can use it as a way to remove blockers to swing out for lethal damage, while making sure you're very likely to survive to the next turn due to its damage prevention ability. This is one of those cards that I think will become a long-term staple in any deck focused around blink effect. Gathering Stone asked the question, what if Herald's Horn was a good card? As soon as I saw this card, I knew it was going to be a massive upgrade over the Horn for my Terra deck. While it does cost 1 more mana than Horn, what you gain from it is more than worth that extra cost. You get an immediate activation instead of having to wait until your next upkeep, and you get way more flexibility with your card selection. See something you don't want? Send it to the bin. See a big creature of the chosen type and want it in the yard instead of your hand? Stone can make it happen. While the extra cost will make it a little awkward for commanders who cost 4, I see this being a big upgrade for decks like Terra that would rather cast their commander on 3 anyways before getting the stone down on the following turn. This is actually one of the cards from the set I'm most excited for, purely because of how often I've found Herald's Horn to be somewhat lacking. So if you too have found Herald's Horn to be underwhelming, I definitely recommend giving Gathering Stone a try. I think this card has so much more potential for only one more mana. Speaking of potential, we have Bree of Clan Stoutarm, which is another interesting option for a commander of a Boros life gain deck that can also fit easily into the 99 of Boros decks that have some incidental life gain. Bree is a 4-mana 4/4 that at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, lets you exile from the top until you hit a non-land card. You can then cast that card for free if its mana value is less than or equal to the life you gained this turn, otherwise you put it in your hand. And you can pay 1 and a white and tap her to give another target creature you control flying and lifelink until end of turn. Boros isn't as starved for card draw options as it used to be, but this Cascade-like effect is a great new way to keep the cards flowing, and with her tap ability letting you give something lifelink and flying, it helps make sure you'll continue to get value from her turn to turn. Mutable Explorer asks the question of what if we made a Wood Elves for all creature types, which is pretty cool. 3 mana gets you a 1/1 changeling that when it enters creates a tapped Mutavault token. Getting a token land is already a pretty unique thing to do as far as effects go, and it being Mutavault allows you to get even more synergy going in your Kindred focused decks. So this seems like an easy include as a ramp option for decks that care a lot about specific creature types as well as tokens. Hero, Attentive First Year, is one of those sneakily strong cards that I think is flying under the radar as both a solid option in the command zone or the 99. 3 mana for a 3/3 that lets you tap 2 untapped creatures you control to copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, but you can only activate it once each turn. Copying triggered abilities is quite powerful, and since he also gives you a body to tap with, you can start using him to copy strong ETBs or attack and damage triggers very quickly. He's my favorite of the hybrid color students from the set, and I expect to feature a deck tech on him in the near future. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. Glen Elendra Guardian is a 3 mana 3/4 with flash and flying. This creature enters with a -1 counter on it, and you can pay 1 and a blue to remove a counter from this creature, to counter target non-creature spell, and have its controller draw a card. This is a definite callback to the popular Glen Elendra Archmage from the past, though this time it has the flexibility of being flashed in as a surprise element, and only costs 3 compared to Archmage's 4. Its counter ability is a little weaker here in giving your opponent a card to replace whatever you just counter. Its ability does work with any type of counter though, so it can be used with +1/+1 or any other variety of counter you manage to put on the creature, which is kind of nice. While I don't think this card's going to replace Archmage in many decks due to the downside of giving your opponent a card, it's possible this card still finds some utility in decks that value the instant speed element, as well as it being a bigger creature. Celestial Reunion is another powerful card for decks that focus on a single creature type. For green and an X, you get to search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. But if you pay the additional cost of choosing a creature type and beholding 2 creatures of that type, that card goes onto the battlefield instead of going to your hand. So if you can pay that additional cost easily, this is essentially another Green Sun Zenith, which has always been one of the more powerful tutor options in green. As such, I think this is going to be a mainstay in all Kindred focused decks running green. There's just no reason not to run this if you have an abundance of creatures at the same time. Twilight Diviner is our reanimation ad for this set, a 3 mana 3/3 that when it enters surveils 2. And whenever 1 or more creatures you control enter, if they entered or were cast from a graveyard, you can create a token that's a copy of one of them. This ability only triggers once each turn. This is a great cheap creature, giving you some card selection and ability to fill up the graveyard. And at 3 mana, it feels like a relatively low opportunity cost to run. It pairs super nicely with one of my favorite cards from last year, Colossal Grave Reaper. But if you have a reanimation-focused deck in general, this seems like a pretty potentially powerful addition, letting you double up on big creatures you bring back from the yard. Kinsera's Sentry is a 2 mana 2/2 with First Strike and Lifelink, and whenever this creature attacks, you can put a creature with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, where X is the number of attacking creatures you control. I think this is just a really solid aggressive card, particularly for decks that care a lot about spamming the board with tokens. Pairs super well with Adeline, who has become one of my favorite aggressive 3 mana cards in white recently, and helps keep applying that aggressive pressure that you need to present with these more aggro-focused decks in Commander. He's also a Kithkin, so that's a nice addition to your Kithkin-focused decks as well. And the First Strike and Lifelink help him get a little more incidental value and make it a little harder for him to be blocked in the early game. And last but certainly not least, we have Formidable Speaker, our world champion card of the set. A 3-mana 2/4 that when it enters lets you discard a card. If you do, search your library for a creature, reveal it, put it into your hand, and you can pay 1 and tap it to untap another target permanent. The first thing that comes to my mind with something like this is Fauna Shaman. While this does cost a little bit more, it does have 2 added benefits here of 1, being able to be used immediately, and 2, not requiring you to actually have a creature in your hand to discard to find your other creature. On top of that, since the effect is an ETB and not something you have to actually go out of your way to activate, it can be easily repeated for value in blink-focused decks. So if you're playing a deck that really values finding 1 or a few specific creatures, this is one you're going to be wanting to look at as a must-include. And I won't be surprised if this ends up being the chase rare of the set. I think it's already commanding one of the higher price tags for the set currently. I don't expect that to change post-release. So those are the cards I plan on picking up from the main set. But what about the Commander precons? Well, I think both precons are really solid and worth picking up in their own right if they interest you. They also have some neat cards that are worth considering just grabbing as singles. In the Ashling precon, we got a new elemental incarnation for each color, all of which have Encore, an ability that lets you exile them from the graveyard to create a token copy with haste for each opponent that gets sacked at the end of the turn. As someone who's always really loved effects like this, like Myriad, I'm really happy they're doing more with Encore here, and it especially makes sense since the elemental precon is focused on sacrificing the elementals anyway. Each of the elementals do pretty different things. Belonging gets you 3 1/1 shapeshifters. Subterfuge lets you give target creature flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, draw that many cards until end of turn. Lamination is your classic, destroy a thing and gain 3 life. But the last 2 are really my favorites of the cycle. Impulsivity, which lets you cast target instant or sorcery spell from a graveyard for free. And Jubilation, who's a classic Craterhoof at home, giving creatures you control +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. These cards are really neat because they all have a pretty decent effect when they enter, but their true power is in being able to encore them. If you get 3 copies of Jubilation, you end up giving your whole board +6/+6 and trample, while having 3 hasty 11/11s with trample that can just attack right away, assuming you have 3 opponents, which seems like a really powerful option for closing out the game. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this cycle, and I think these cards are going to see a significant amount of play even outside of elemental decks. Speaking of things that I think we'll see play outside of their precons, Oft-Nabbed Goat I think is going to be one of those cards that, sure, it's a -1/-1 counter card, but I think it's going to see play in many, many other places. And it presents a interesting kind of minigame-like aspect to it. 2 mana gets you a 0/5 Goat, where you can pay 1 to draw a card, gain control of this creature, and put a -1 counter on it. But only your opponents can activate this ability and only as sorcery. And when the Goat dies, if it had 1 or more negative counters on it, its owner draws that many cards and each other player loses that much life. This is a really fun little minigame you can do where you play the Goat down early, your opponents start stealing it to draw cards, you can even steal it back to draw a card, but ultimately the Goat's going to die, and when it does, you're going to get some nice cards and ding your opponents for some decent damage. Even if you don't end up putting any mana into the Goat, it can still provide you quite a bit of value for a very low cost, and as such, I think it's going to be a pretty popular splash into a lot of decks. Another card that I think is going to be quite popular is Springleaf Parade. X and 2 green gets you an enchantment that when it enters creates X 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature tokens with Changeling, and makes it so creature tokens you control have tapped to add 1 mana of any color. This is just a pretty generically good token focused card, especially so if you care about a specific creature type. This really enables token decks to get out of control because not only is it making some tokens when it enters, but it's enabling all your tokens to tap for mana, which you can then pump into even more token spells. Or maybe just another big X spell that can pump up your board. Then we have Grave Venerations. 4 mana for an enchantment that when it enters makes you the Monarch. And at the beginning of your end step, if you're the Monarch, you can return up to 1 target creature from your graveyard to your hand. In addition to this, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, there are a lot of different enchantments in Magic that have this, drain effect when one of your creatures dies, and most of them are 3 mana. So when looking at this, we're asking, what are we actually getting for that 1 additional mana? And in this case, I think it's quite a lot. Becoming the Monarch is great. You're going to guarantee get 1 card out of this, if not many more throughout the course of the game. And if you have any creatures in your graveyard, you're going to guarantee getting 2 cards out of this for that additional 1 mana. As such, I think this is going to be a really great include just because of its added flexibility, decks that care a lot about this creature dying, draining your opponent's effect. And last but certainly not least, we have what I think is going to be the most popular and played card in Commander from this Commander product, and that is going to be Abundant Countryside. A rare land that taps for colorless, or can tap for 1 mana of any color, but that mana can only be spent on a creature spell. Additionally, you can pay 6 and tap it to make a 1/1 shapeshifter changeling, but that text I expect to be largely irrelevant. The real nice thing about this is just a land that taps for 1 of any color if you are a creature-focused deck. And there's no other downside to it. It doesn't enter tapped, it doesn't cost you life, there are no hoops you have to jump through. If you're a deck that is super creature-focused, this is essentially a second command tower. And while lower color decks might not necessarily need this as badly, I think once you get in 3, 4, and 5 color territory, this is just going to be a really nice addition to help smooth out your mana fixing. How played this card ends up being, I think will depend a lot on the availability, since it is only in the Commander product as well as collector boosters, but I expect this one to become very popular among Commander-focused players. It's definitely one of the better land additions we've got in a Commander product in a long time, as far as I can remember. While we're talking about the Commander product though, I wanted to touch on some upgrades for the precons. While there are a ton of options for upgrading the recently released precons, there are a handful in the set that I think are great includes that are actually mostly super budget. And if you're interested in a more in-depth upgrade guide, I plan on doing one for the Blight Curse precon sometime next week. Starting with the Blight Curse precon, the main thing I think that deck was lacking that needed more of is the Blight effect. A handful of the cards in the main set did make it into the precon, but I don't think there were nearly enough Blight cards, which was kind of surprising to me, given that many of these cards are uncommon or bulk rare. So the first few we're looking at here, like Warren Torchmaster, just gives us a cheap way to Blight 1 and get another effect out of that. In this case, gives a target creature haste. But we're really just playing it for the Blight. With Auntie, we get to draw a card whenever we put a -1 counter on one of our things, so Blight being able to let us do that every turn means we're going to be drawing a lot of cards over time. Shadow Urchin is a 3-mana 3/4 that lets us Blight 1 whenever it attacks, and whenever a creature you control with 1 or more counters on it dies, you get to exile that many cards from the top, and until your next end step, you can play those cards, so even more potential card advantage. Scuzzback Scrounger is probably the best of the Blight cards. 2 mana for a 3/2 that at the beginning of your first main phase lets you Blight 1, and if you do, creates a treasure token. This is a great way to be able to get the commander out a turn earlier and just give you some nice color fixing or mana acceleration, while also doing the thing that your deck wants to do in putting negative counters on its own stuff. High Perfect Morcant is not only a good commander in her own right, but a nice addition to this deck in terms of just getting more negative counters on opponents' creatures. The deck isn't full of elves, so you're not going to get that tap ability super often. However, there are some in the deck, and a few of our upgrade options here are elves as well, so it is possible you will sometimes get that proliferation effect, but really we're just using this as a way to get multiple counters on opponents' creatures. Gristlegutton is a 2-mana 1/3 that taps to Blight 1, discard a card, and if you do, draw a card. This just gives us a little bit of card selection while also getting us Blight, and we especially appreciate creatures that have a bit higher toughness, as they are great potential outlets for putting our counters on. Dream Seizure is a 4-mana for a 3/2 with flying, and when it enters, you can Blight 1. If you do, each opponent discards a card. These upgrades really focus on letting us Blight a lot, so we have good card advantage, and this card not only helps with that game plan, but also whittles your opponent's hand down a bit as well. Dawnhand Dissident is a 1-mana 1/2 elf warlock that you can tap to Blight 1 and Surveil 1, or you can tap to Blight 2 and exile target card from a graveyard. During your turn, you can cast creature spells from among cards you own exiled with this creature by removing 3 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying their other costs. Now really, this is just here for the tap Blight 1, Surveil 1. The rest of the text is honestly just a bonus. I think Blight is a lot better in small increments since you don't actually get more value out of putting 2 counters on a thing at once compared to 1 at a time. You're still only getting 1 card draw each, but it's nice to have the rest of the text here, as it just gives another way to actually remove counters from our own creatures if it comes to that. Darkness Descends is one I'm really surprised didn't make it into the precon. 4 mana for a sorcery that just puts 2 -1 counters on each creature. This is one of those cards you play in the late game with Auntie out. You're going to draw a ridiculous amount of cards while also hitting your opponent for a pretty high amount of life, assuming there's a lot of stuff on the board. Cinder Strike is a 1-mana removal spell that, as an additional cost to cast it, you may Blight 1, and it deals 2 damage to target creature. If you blighted, instead you deal 4 damage to that creature. While it's obviously not going to be killing any massive creatures, the fact that you're going to blight from this means it's likely going to replace itself if you have Auntie out, which makes it a very suitable removal option. And last but not least, we have another removal option here in Bog Slither's Embrace. 2 mana gets you a sorcery that, as an additional cost to cast it, you can blight 1 or pay 3, and it exiles target creature. And yeah, much like the last spell, this is just a pretty okay removal spell that becomes significantly better when that blight 1 ends up drawing you a card. The great thing about all these upgrades though, is that aside from High Perfect Morkin, which probably is the least important one, all these cards cost under $1. So if you're looking to upgrade the deck without spending that much more money, there are a lot of really decent uncommons and cheap rares that do that in the set. And the same is true for the Elemental Precon as well. We have the Flip Ashling, Ashling Rekindled, and Ashling Rhymebound. While this card can act as a commander in its own right, it's also just a decent way of getting some additional mana. The front half of the card gets you a 1/3 that does a little bit of filtering, letting you discard a card and draw a card. But the real reason you're playing this is Ashling Rhymebound, who, when she transforms and at the beginning of your first main phase, gives you 2 mana of any one color, but you can only spend that to cast spells with mana value 4 or greater. So this is going to be great in any, big spell focused deck, or the Elemental Precon where you just want a bit of that extra mana so you can have more mana to evoke your other elementals out with. Ashling's Command is 5 mana for an elemental instant, lets you choose 2. Create a token that's a copy of target elemental you control, target player draws 2, it deals 2 damage to each creature target player controls, or target player creates 2 treasure tokens. I think these options are all fairly good. And it's worth noting, if you copy an elemental that's evoked out, or even copy one of the tokens that Ashling creates, you don't end up having to sacrifice the new token you make, which is really nice. I've always loved these modal focused spells, and Ashling's Command looks to be a great addition to all elemental decks. Kindle the Inner Flame is another really solid addition. 4 mana for an elemental sorcery that creates a token copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of your end step sacrifices token. And it also has flashback for 1 and a red, requiring you to behold 3 elementals. The flashback is kind of the main reason for playing this card. 4 mana to get a token copy of a big elemental isn't bad. I mean, that's basically the whole thing that Ashling is doing. But since the deck has so many elementals, you should be able to very easily pay that flashback cost. So that way you can evoke out an elemental with Ashling, or you could even just cast this spell for 4 and then immediately do the flashback, getting another token elemental in that same turn. Lava Leaper is a 4 mana 4/4 that gives all creatures haste, and whenever a player taps a basic land for mana, they get an additional 1 mana of any type that land produced. These types of cards are always dangerous, giving all your opponents enough haste, giving them extra mana, usually things you don't want to be doing. But if this card's only going to be around on your turn as a temporary token, then you don't really have to worry about that, and you can just reap all the benefits of these effects and then have it be sacked and go away once the turn ends, which I think is going to be the optimal way for using this card in the elemental deck. Shine Striker is just a decent way to draw cards in the deck. 6 mana for a 3/3 with flying and vivid. When this creature enters, you draw cards equal to the number of colors among permanents you control. This is one of those cards you do not ever want to really be paying that 6 mana cost for, but if you're able to evoke it out for cheaper, so you're going to get that trigger twice, and you have a decent number of colored permanents on the board, this can be quite a lot of draw for not too much cost. Sunderflock gives elementals the option of a one-sided bounce. 9 mana gets you a 5/5 elemental with flying that when it enters, if you cast it, you get to return all non-elemental creatures to their owner's hands, and it costs X less to cast, or X is the greatest mana value among elementals you control. So this is one that can be gotten out for very cheap if you have a big elemental on the board, or you can also evoke it with Ashling for the same effect. And last but not least, we have the Twin Flame Travelers. 4 mana for a 3/3 with flying. If a triggered ability of another elemental you control triggers, it triggers an additional time. This is just really, really powerful. Not only is this going to double up on your elemental ETBs, but it's also going to double up on the tokens that Ashling ends up creating from your evoked elemental. So this card, being left alone, will get out of hand really, really fast. And finally, to close things out, I wanted to talk a little bit about reprints in the set. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the reprints we got, especially for the Blight Curse Precon, as once the early information about that deck leaked, There's a lot of speculating on -1 counter cards. Unfortunately, many of those cards got reprinted in the precon, which was really nice to see. But there were also some just generally good reprints outside of those that I wanted to talk about. Yarok the Desecrated is a Panharmonicon on a stick, a really powerful Sultai commander, great in the Elementals deck. And while he wasn't super expensive, being in that $3 to $5 range, it's still a really nice one to see go down to under $1. Vraska Betrayal Sting is a powerful proliferation planeswalker that also gives you some card draw or removal. This card was also going for about $5 or so, so it's another great one to pick up while it's only $1. Timeless Lotus is one that really surprised me. This card was actually going for about $15 before the reprint. I don't think this card is that great, honestly. 5 mana for tapping for Wooburg is, not the worst thing in the world, but there's certainly better ways to accomplish getting big ramp in 5 colors. So I'm surprised that an artifact that enters tapped was this expensive. But if you're looking to pick one up, well, now's the time to do it as it's down to only $3. Savala Heart of the Wilds has been an all-star mono green commander for a long time and sees play in a variety of green focused decks. She had trickled up to about $7 or so another one where it's nice to see a reprint driving that price down if you're looking for some additional card draw or mana generation in green. Chamil the Inner Sun is probably my favorite reprint of the set. This one was going for around $18 or $20 at its peak and only had 1 printing, so it's really nice to see us get another printing, as I think there are a lot of decks that really appreciate just having a way to not only make their stuff uncounterable, but also discovering 5 at the end of turn for some card draw or value. Out of all the reprints, I think this is probably the big one to pick up if you've had your eye on it. Another similarly big one is Bloom Tender, a really powerful mana dork for decks that run 3 or more colors. Now this one has seemed to rebound already a bit. I think the low I saw on this was around $10, and currently it's already rebounded to about $17, while the price before the reprint was in the $20 to $25 range. I'm hoping this goes down a little bit once people get their hands on more cards and more boxes are opened. But I think it spiking back up is just showing that there is a lot of demand for this card, most of which I think is coming from Commander. And the last 2 non-land cards here are Fury and Endurance. These are cards that weren't super expensive, but they were pretty powerful cards. But even so, they had started to creep up a bit, with Endurance being about $9 and Fury being about $4 or $5. I have no doubt these would have gone up even higher if they weren't reprinted in the precon, as people sought to pick them up for the Elemental deck, so it's really nice they ended up getting included in the deck list. And then finally, we can't talk about reprints if we aren't talking about the Shocklands. Lorwyn brings the other half of the Shocklands to Standard, and because of their abundant use in pretty much every format in Magic, Shocklands only fall so far, but if you've been looking to pick up any of the 5 on screen here, now is probably the time to do so, as it's pretty rare you see these cards get below that $10 mark. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. I'll have a link in the description if you want to take a look at all the cards I went over in this video. And again, I'd love to hear from you in the comments about which cards you're most excited to pick up from the set. I have some other videos focused around the set that I'm working on, the next of which will probably be an upgrade to the Blight Curse Precon, hopefully coming later next week. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.